Hello and welcome to Writing and Illustrating Children's Picture Books with me, Christian Fox. Now this series of videos is called 30 Essential Children's Books I Think You Should Be Aware of. That doesn't mean I think these are the 30 best children's books ever printed. These are just the 30 books I refer to most often in either the classes I teach at university level, the books I refer to most often in the online courses or in workshop sessions or any number of things. These are books for both writers and illustrators. They either provide very good writing examples, very good rhyming examples, very good examples of character design, of composition. It could be anything. So these are the kind of books I just expect all my students to have a sort of passing awareness of. And if you're just starting in this subject, this provides a good reading list for you, and you can scan through the videos and see which books you're sort of familiar with, which videos you want to start out with, and then kind of just expand out from there. Now, because there are so many books, because there are 30 on the list, I've split it into 3 groups of 10 for you. There are 10 in the classics section from around the 1850s up to the 1950s. Then there are 10 from the 1950s up through the 1970s, and then the final 10 take us up to the contemporary market. And today we're going to start with number 1 in the classic books section. And the one I'm recommending today isn't one book at all. It's to become familiar with traditional folk tales, fairy tales, all that kind of thing. Okay, to start out with recommending traditional tales, folk tales, fairy tales, all those kind of things, seems like a bit of a cheat. So why am I recommending that? I mean, surely everybody's already familiar with all these tales. Well, the reason is we refer to them most frequently in the classes because they provide a very good sort of starting point for writers, for illustrators. You're already familiar with these stories. Children are already familiar with these stories. Parents are already familiar with these stories, or they think they are. So there's already that kind of onboard familiarity from children. You already have a sort of baseline starting point. I'm talking about stories that started in ancient Greece. We're looking at things like Aesop's fables, which started around 600 years BC, and a lot of the Greek myths, if you think of the story of Icarus, that kind of thing. They can all provide good examples for your children's book story. But the Aesop's fables kind of started a children's storytelling tradition that's still going on to present day. Now, they weren't actually published until printed books came in around the mid-1400s, around 1450, when the Gutenberg press came in. After Bibles were printed, one of the very first things that was printed after that was the Aesop's fables. Now, these weren't necessarily all written in ancient Greece. These stories have been modified, they've been added to over the years. Some of them have been proven to have been created by completely different authors. So you can see how they kind of progress as the years, as the decades roll on. From there, Charles Perrault in France, from the end of the 1600s, he started to take traditional tales that have been handed down from generation to generation and actually start writing them down for the first time. So he added things like Little Red Riding Hood and Cinderella to the list. So they were the first kind of recorded versions of those tales. From there, we get to the Brothers Grimm, in what was it, the mid sort of 1800s, 1850, that kind of period. Now, the Grimm brothers were very, very keen on German and traditional literature. Now, they took traditional folk tales. A lot of the Grimm stories were very, very dark, although they said they were for children at the time. Even at the time they were written, they had to start editing these things because a lot of them were very, very dark. So they can be quite gruesome for a modern audience. Whereas the Andersen ones, they can still be gruesome. They're often not as gruesome as the Grimm's tales, but they have a strong emphasis on the moral side of things. Now, a lot of those early fairy tales, they might surprise you. Fairy tales, folk tales, traditional tales. They might surprise you at how dark they are. I know a lot of the Charles Perrault Cinderella, the ugly sister characters. One of them was cutting off her toes and part of her ankles and heels and things like that in order to try and fit into the slippers. So they can be quite dark. I think in one of the Grimm's versions of Snow White, I think the huntsman was asked to bring back her liver and spleen and kidneys and all those kind of things as proof of death. So you can see that these things are quite dark. It wasn't until Hans Christian Andersen added his around 1850 onwards that he kind of took these dark traditional tales and more or less didn't kind of just translate them into the modern language. He modified them. He added a moral content. He made them more child friendly. He took the basis of a lot of those stories and created a lot of new stories that you'll be very familiar with from the Disney films and from a lot of modern adaptations. Now, you can either start out with a good translation. It's very good to get back to the original sources, so it'd be very nice to get to yourself either a copy of how these stories were originally written by the Brothers Grimm, or the Hans Christian Andersen versions are very readily available, and see kind of how these stories first started out. Go back to the original source of these stories and compare them with the modern day adaptations, whether they're the Disney films, whether they're a lot of children's book adaptations, whether they're nursery rhyme adaptations, all kinds of other compilations. There are also lots of other compilations you can get yourself. I don't necessarily recommend these. These are just readily available. This one's, what's this, 365. This is an Usborne compilation of fairy stories. You can see how they've changed through the decades, how they mix up the Andersen tales, how they mix up the Grimm's tales, how they mix up the essence of some of the Aesop stories, all kinds of things. They've evolved and changed as the years go on. Another one here, readily available. These are ones I read to my children, where we started out before we moved on to children's picture books. So what's this? Ladybird Book of Bedtime Stories. Again, this is a compilation of 100 or so just traditional tales, folk tales, fairy tales, all that kind of thing. Now, these are very good sources of inspiration for you. I know I'm not recommending one book here. I'm recommending a kind of whole genre to start you off, which is a little bit confusing. But it's just to kind of go back and reacquaint yourself with a lot of these stories and maybe even go back to the source material. Now, the reason, as I said, the reason I recommend them is they provide very good inspiration for your writing. Roald Dahl took a lot of them and twisted them. This one's Revolting Rhymes, and he's done other adaptations of famous traditional stories, famous fairy tales, that kind of thing. And he does a really sort of dark and humorous twist on them. Other versions, the Albergs, Janet and Alan Alberg, did their Pocket Postman and Jolly Pocket Postman, where there are lots of twisted fairy tales. The Shrek films do exactly the same things. They mix up these fairy tales so they all the characters kind of interact with each other. And Beth Walvin did a Macmillan Prize winner. She won the Macmillan Prize 4 or 5 years ago now with her Little Red Book, and she's recently done a Rapunzel, and I think she's done a third one as well. So she's taken them as very good sources of inspiration. She's added her own unique twist on them. Roald Dahl added his own unique twist on them. These are the very good sources of inspiration for both writers and illustrators. So they provide great source material for you to use as a starting point. But the reason I recommend the original stories is so that you can go back to the original source and see how these stories started out. And as I say, you can add in other things. It doesn't have to be fairy stories, it doesn't have to be traditional nursery rhymes. You can add in traditional Greek myths and any other kind of traditional tales that you can find. Well, I hope you found this video useful. This is one of 30 essential children's books I think you should be aware of. And as I said at the outset, I've broken these into 3 groups of 10 representing the classic market, the middle ground market up to around the 1950s, and the contemporary market from around the beginning of the 80s up to present day. So take a look at any of those three groups, and from there you can sort of cross-mix. I'll be loading them roughly one every few days at the moment. Give me a like, comments in the section below, either on this video or other videos you'd like to see me make on the subject of children's books. Take a look at the online course. There should be a link just about there on the screen, which, if you want to take your studies further, if you've liked these videos, you'd like to take things a little bit further, have a look at the courses I offer for writers or illustrators. Subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this. You'll get a notification every time I upload a new video, and otherwise I'll see you in the next video.